In this video, we'll be showing you how to add a camera using the manual add function in the Sentry VMS Client. So first, I'll be logging into the client. Once the client has fully come up, I'll be clicking on Administration and Setup and Configuration. This will allow me to change the setup and configuration parameters for any of the servers that are listed here under Known Video Servers. Since we only have one, let's click on that. And as you can see, we have several tabs that populate across the top of the window. The one we're interested in this video is cameras. So let's click on Manual Add, and a new camera window pops into view. Now from this window, you have the capability of adding over 2,100 different camera versions and models from close to, it's at least 100 to 110 manufacturers right now. And we're adding more on a regular basis. So the chances of the camera you have that you're trying to add to Sentry VMS being on this list is extremely high. And even if it is not, we support additional cameras that are not on the list yet via a universal camera driver and also via ONVIF if your camera supports the ONVIF standard. So in this particular case, we're going to be adding a new camera. I'm going to be picking a camera that we already have installed on our network. And it's going to be a Panasonic camera. And I'm going to hit this drop-down box and get the model number of that camera, which in this case happens to be an SC385. What we'll need is the IP address of the camera on our network, so we can identify that and communicate with it. And also the username and password that allows you to gain access to the camera via its web interface. Other parameters you see here are only to be used if you're sharing an IP address on your particular network and or if you're using alternate ports. Let's say you have a block on your network for port 80 or for FTP port 21. You can change these by checking off this box. This allows you to change the port number, for example, here and here, to whatever you want to use on your particular network. This could be whether it's inside your network or you're accessing it externally, either across the internet or through some other mechanism. But for these purposes, I'll leave these as the default. Now you'll notice also under web access, which is down here on the bottom, this will populate a link to the camera's web interface based on the IP address you typed in up here. And it defaults to port 80. So if you use an alternate port, you'll notice as I'm changing the HTTP port, it's changing it also in the web access link. This way it knows that in order to gain access to that camera, I'll have to use the port number that was selected by the user. Okay, now with these parameters all set, there's two other things we need to do. Whether or not we want a timestamp, and you can select no timestamp. That means you will not see a timestamp burned into the video when you save it. Or you could select to have the timestamp burned into video. Now, why would you want either one? If the videos are going to be used internally, if they're for monitoring purposes or for other things where you're not going to be distributing these to a third party, no timestamp would probably suffice. However, if you need to give these videos to law enforcement or for analysis or for research or for any other purpose, you may want to burn a timestamp into the video. This way you don't have to rely on the player's timestamp in order to figure out where you are in the video. And then there's no question as to what particular time frame you're looking at in the video you're viewing. So for right now, let's just leave it at no timestamp. And we're going to change the camera name to test camera. All right, we'll click on the add button. And it's going to ask you, this IP camera has been added. Do you want to continue adding cameras? At this point, we can click yes and add additional cameras. But since we're only going to add one for this purpose, we'll click no. Now, if we scroll down to the list here, under cameras to be monitored, we'll see our test camera has now been added. So we'll click apply, click OK. And now when we expand Sentry VMS as the server name in our navigation tree and scroll down to the bottom, there is our test camera. And from here, I can do anything that the camera's capabilities allow me to do. In this particular case, it happens to be a PTZ camera. So as you can see, I'm moving the camera itself around. by right-clicking on that camera name, if you have administrative rights, you can pull up the properties on that camera, and you can modify the settings for that camera. So if any of the parameters here change, you can change those on the fly later on after you've added. You do not have to delete the camera and re-add it. You can simply modify the recording parameters, any advanced things like how much storage options the camera takes, what the motion settings are going to be for this camera, video settings. There are some optional controls which may go along with that particular camera make and model. Whether you're not just setting up a privacy zone. Some cameras, as it states here, privacy zones are not supported under this configuration. Some cameras do not have the capability of privacy zones, some do. And this tab will allow you to set those. And then there's the maintenance tab, which allows you to enter in additional information for this camera. So anyone with access to this as an administrator can pull this information up for that particular camera. And that's how you add a camera using the manual add function in Sentry VMS.